Riots, decapitations, and gruesome scenes are becoming commonplace in Brazil's jails. In the last 4 years, hundreds of people have been killed in prison unrest, mainly in the northern region of Brazil, where overcrowding and the fight between criminal gangs to control the drug trade is fierce.
What we see over and over again is a prison population that's growing faster than the number of spaces, official spaces.
Benjamin Lessing, a political science professor at the University of Chicago, studies criminal conflict with a strong focus on Latin America. We met in Rio de Janeiro before the arrival of COVID-19 in Brazil.
So if you see officially we have a cell for 10 people, that would already be quite crowded with 2 or 3, 4 level bunks. So it's already not a lot of space. And then when you put, say, 20 or even 30 people into a cell that was intended for 10, you've got 2 people sleeping on one bed, you have people almost always sleeping on the ground, and in some cases you have places where people have to stand, and they have to take turns in the course of the night, lying down on the ground and the rest of the time standing, or sleeping near a bathroom, which isn't really even a bathroom, it's a hole in the floor.
With roughly 850,000 people incarcerated in Brazil, which is over twice the prison system capacity, the impracticality of social distancing and the unsanitary environment further engender the rapid spread of COVID-19 in penal institutions. For Renato de Vito, a public defender of the state of São Paulo, Brazil's prison policy is one of the greatest challenges of the country's public agenda.
Brazil has one of the worst prison systems in the world. The pandemic of coronavirus exposed problems that already existed, aggravating them.
Brazil's penal law guarantees access to health, education, and legal assistance. It also dictates the separation of the prison population based on the convict's level of danger to society and on the severity of their crimes. But most of these rules live only on paper. Vulnerable, non-violent inmates are housed with and exposed to dangerous criminals.
In Brazil, what you're seeing today is an even more problematic phenomenon, which is that the very process of mass incarceration, the very process of building so many prisons and putting so many people in prison has created a kind of new form of organized crime, what they call here facções or factions. These are criminal organizations who are born within the prison system. And even though they expand beyond the prison system to the favelas, to the slums, the core of their power is within the prison system. And the real base of their power, ironically, paradoxically, is the prison masses.
The prison gangs often take charge of improving living conditions inside by enforcing security as well as providing basic supplies, which factors in the prisoner's decision to join them.
It's the basic notion of what a government does. It saves you from living in a chaotic, brutal, violent world by making you part of a government, right? By governing you. And people are happy to do that. They would much rather be governed by a prison gang, even if it imposes rules, even if it charges them taxes, than live in a world where they could be killed or raped or beaten up or stolen from at any moment. The more the state is out there arresting people and bringing them to prison, the more the prison gang has power over people on the street, because the people on the street know that they're likely to go to prison, and they know that when they go to prison, the prison gang is going to have a lot of control over their lives. So the people on the street are willing to obey the prison gang, even though they're free, they're on the street, they haven't gone to prison yet, but they know that it's likely in their future.
There are 2 main national-level gangs in Brazil: the Comando Vermelho and the Primeiro Comando da Capital, known as PCC. The Comando Vermelho was born in a now-closed prison in Ilha Grande, an island 100 kilometers outside of Rio de Janeiro's capital. In the 70s, the faction took over the drug trade in the favelas in Rio.
So it very quickly eliminated or took over or brought into itself all of these individual little donos and bosses in every favela, all suddenly became part of this Comando Vermelho. All through the 80s and 90s, Rio was the only place that looked like this. Everywhere else in Brazil, including São Paulo, the favelas, you didn't have a faction, you didn't have a prison gang.
That changed after the 1992 Carandiru riot in São Paulo, the deadliest prison massacre in Brazil to date. 300 police officers stormed Carandiru to contain the turmoil. When we interviewed Fabiano Bordignon for this story, he was the director of Brazil's National Penitentiary Department.
O Carandiru foi um episódio antigo na história prisional brasileira. Era uma unidade grande que provavelmente os controles que o Estado exercia sobre a unidade eram pequenos. E nós tivemos uma questão envolvendo presos que foi evoluindo e foi necessário ter uma intervenção policial.
And they intervened with force, leaving 111 prisoners dead. 1 year later, in 1993, the PCC was born to avenge the Carandiru massacre, and it soon established itself as the largest and most powerful criminal organization in the history of Brazil.
In the United States, prison gangs are divided by race. So there's a black prison gang and a white prison gang, and there's 2 Mexican prison gangs in California. So when you think about a prison gang in the United States getting the kind of power to control a whole city, the way that the PCC, for example, does in São Paulo, you can't even imagine it. There's no way that a white prison gang is going to control a black neighborhood or a Latino neighborhood or vice versa. So these gangs tend to control the street gangs of their same ethnicity. In Brazil, none of these gangs have a racial component. They don't think of themselves as white or black or indigenous or anything else. They're just Brazilian. Because of that, they're actually able to become more powerful.
Brazil is one of the most homicidal countries. Yet most arrests are for crimes where the police have caught people red-handed, which tend to be drug trafficking or petty theft, and do not involve a criminal investigation. The majority of the prison population is poor, barely educated, by no means able to hire private attorneys, and there is a shortage of public defenders. More than 40% of the detainees are awaiting trial.
Então isso é uma coisa cultural, secular.
Manuela da Silva is the president of the Brazilian Bar Association in Altamira.
Uma pessoa que comete um crime menor, de menor potencial, e que já quando chega no sistema penitenciário já tem todo aquele aparato criminoso montado, em que ao invés de ser ressocializado, ele acaba entrando para uma escola do crime.
Pre-trial white-collar workers and educated inmates with a university degree enjoy special cell privileges and are not confined with common criminals. Shielded by personal lawyers, they're often able to navigate the judicial system through appeals.
Even though Brazil is a wealthy country, there still are people who don't get enough to eat. Not criminals, just regular people who the best opportunities that they can get in the market, they still unable to lead a decent life. So when the bottom layer of society is so poor and you start to put people in prison, the people in prison have to be worse off than the worst people who didn't commit crimes. You can't make it better for people to be in prison. It's going to be politically impossible to give prisoners enough to eat, decent medical attention, some chance at education, when a perfectly law-abiding citizen doesn't have those things.
There's recently been a wave of prison riots in the north and northeast states of Brazil.
This is an important drug route. The PCC and Comando Vermelho realized that they needed to quickly scramble to try to control these routes. Then you had this very strong pushback from the Família do Norte, which is based in Amazonas, but is also present in some other states. So that was this faction that rose up to counter the PCC, and it used to be allied with the Comando Vermelho. They had a very strong alliance. And that's what triggered not only the prison riots of 2016 and 17, but also the breakdown in the peace between Comando Vermelho and PCC. For the last 30 years, most of the time, Until 2016, the PCC and the Comando Vermelho had a kind of non-aggression pact.
Altamira's prison, for instance, was housing more than twice its capacity before the riot that took place in 2019.
After the wave of massacres at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, you saw prison administrators separating and segregating the prisons by gang. But now, in the last year or so, you've seen more putting prisoners together. It varies from state to state, but it's often because they just don't have enough space. These massacres happen when these gangs that are enemies see a chance to break in. They're worried about being attacked, and so they want to attack first.
Altamira's massacre left 58 inmates dead, 16 of them beheaded. 31 gang leaders suspected of ordering the rampage were transported to federal prisons. 4 of them were strangled to death in a cell truck during the transfer, raising the death toll to 62.
Estavam sendo transportados presos da mesma facção e eles mesmos se mataram. Nem as facções, a mesma facção se respeita entre elas. Então o nível de humanidade desses criminosos é um nível muito baixo. São pessoas que dificilmente vão poder conviver em sociedade, por isso que vão para um presídio federal de segurança máxima, celas individuais, sem contato físico e 22 horas dentro da cela com apenas 2 horas de banho de sol.
É meio que, sei lá.
This man was the brother of one of the prisoners who allegedly was killed by a fellow gang member during the transfer. He asked not to be identified.
É difícil acreditar, né? E também pela forma que todos estavam indo, né? Algemados dos pés até a cabeça. E algemados, como é que vão ter um conflito, né? Meio que braçal, conflito, né? Corpo a corpo, assim. Difícil. Então deixa muita dúvida, assim.
It was the third time this man's 22-year-old brother was thrown into jail.
Antes de se inserir no mundo do crime, procurou emprego, né? Teve portas fechadas, né? Até chegar a esse ponto de recorrer ao mundo do crime. Eu acho que meu irmão fazia parte, sim, da facção que participou, né, diretamente do motim. E é algo que é preocupante porque tem muitos jovens que entram ali dentro que praticam primeiro um furto, né? E aí já entram né, sendo aliciados, assim. E quando saem, já saem com missões, né? Já saem com tarefas.
Nem a gente soube que estava.
The mother of a transferred prisoner said her son was constantly beaten and shot with rubber bullets by the police while in jail. We cannot verify this information. She requested that we conceal her identity.
A maioria fez coisa errada, mas estão pagando. Mas são seres humanos, igual todos nós. E pode ser que devido tanta represália, porrada que eles vão levando, tanto xingamento, tanto spray de pimenta, possa ser que aconteça coisa pior mais na frente. Quando ultrapassa seu limite, todo ser humano é capaz de fazer atrocidades, né?
Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has publicly avowed that criminals can't be treated as normal human beings. He believes that the more factions kill each other, the better.
There's an assumption built into this view that there's X number of criminals, and if they can all be killed, or they can kill themselves in fighting, then we'll have no more criminals. But that's not true. New criminals are constantly being created because the system is arresting young people, and young people have no other options, and the drug trade is bringing them in.
Brazil's prison population is the third largest on the planet. Most of the prison units suspended visitations in March due to the pandemic, and despite some states' recent approval of a gradual resumption of visits, declining visitations reduce prisoners' access to a legal defense and prevent the outside world from seeing the conditions inside.
The inmates depend on the parents to get soap and other hygiene items.
Official studies indicate that the number of coronavirus cases in prisons has doubled in the last 3 months. Nearly 40,000 people were infected by the end of November, including correctional officers. 213 have died.
The official data released is not reliable because there's no testing policy for prisoners, and there's little transparency for prison information. In São Paulo, the state with the largest prison population in the country, 30% of the tested inmates presented positive results. They are not releasing them, they are providing basic health care and trying to isolate them in overcrowded jails.
In order to prevent the spread of coronavirus, the National Council of Justice has recommended that courts ease some sentences by adopting measures such as house arrest and provisional releases. This rule specifically benefits pretrial detainees who have committed non-violent crimes, mothers and pregnant women, and individuals at higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19.
However, the measure is facing strong resistance.
Why?
There is an incarceration culture in Brazil. So the judge resists to this measure that tends to release prisoners.
Once you have a very large prison population, it is important to make sure that there are physical conditions to house those people safely.
Safety and efficiency that the current system has not been able to attain with the pandemic crisis, hitting the hardest in all Brazilian prisons.